Good morning, everyone. This is Father Nate, missionary priest in Italy. And thanks for joining us today, September 8th, on No Greater Delight, our podcast on Marian feasts and Marian meditations. Indeed, this is a very special day for us because it is the birthday of the Blessed Virgin Mary. That's the first thing the Abbot Orsini points out. But before we get started with that, it's also interesting to note that today, the Pope Pius XII issued an encyclical in 1953 on this day, entitled Fulgens Corona, right? An encyclical on the Blessed Virgin Mary. So like I said, the Abbot Orsini notes that today is the Nativity of Mary, the feast of her birth. He dates it at 15 BC, but we're told that it was instituted only in the year 436. So a couple interesting notes on this. The Nativity of the Virgin was celebrated in Rome and in a couple other places in the West in the 600s, but it didn't become a major liturgical occasion in the Roman Catholic Church until the 1200s, right? From then until 1955, the Nativity of Mary was actually preceded by a fast and then celebrated for a whole week. That's quite beautiful. So, although a simple feast and not a solemnity or a day of obligation is how that's celebrated now, September 8th remains the main commemoration at many of the world's Marian shrines, right? So why September 8th? Well, in the Byzantine Empire, so we're talking, in the East, where the feast first evolved, the calendar year began on September 1st, right? And we're told that the liturgical year still begins that way in some Greek denominations. So September 8th was the octave of New Year, right? 1 year later, right? Scholars believe that this date was chosen since it was symbolic that the beginning of the work of salvation should be commemorated near to the beginning of the new year, right? And then the Solemnity of the Immaculate Conception was later fixed at December 8th, 9 months prior, right? We're told that the Greek church year begins with Mary's birth in September and ends with her Dormition in August. Of course, we're told that it's also fitting that the Virgin be born under the sign of Virgo, if you believe in those signs, which I quite frankly don't. We're also told, courtesy of the Abbot Orsini, that they celebrate the dedication of the Church of Our Lady of Lisieux in the Diocese of Laon, then leagues from Reims in France, and also the dedication of Our Lady of Montserrat in Catalonia. We won't talk much about Our Lady of Montserrat because there's some conflict regarding the dates. I did find that it's celebrated in the town of Hormigueros in Puerto Rico, but why the Abbot Orsini puts it on this day, again, it could be because of the dedication, but there's also other feast days other celebrations of it that we'll talk about. Likewise, the Abbot Orsini says they celebrate Our Lady of Palermo in Malta. Now, he says that this celebrates the lifting of the Turkish siege in 1565. Okay, that's entirely possible. The story is a little bit more complicated than that. So we're told that the name comes from the mountains, the Palermos mountain, on the island of Rhodes in Greece, right? Where there was already a place of worship that was pretty popular when the Knights of the Order of St. John arrived there from Jerusalem in 1306. It's possible that this image was in Palermo before it went to Malta, right? The inhabitants of Rhodes believed, and this was the oral tradition, that the image had been painted by St. Luke. St. Luke has done so much painting. When the knights were expelled from Rhodes by the Turks in 1530, they took with them the image and they installed it with great veneration in their chapel on the island of Malta. Then, when Napoleon conquered and sacked Malta in 1798, Our Lady of Palermo was one of the few things that the Grand Master of the Order, Ferdinand von Homsek-Zurbruggen, was allowed to take into exile with him, right? Then there's a whole story of that it was given by members of the Order who were somewhat opposed to the Grand Master. They gave it to the Tsar of Russia, and then the Tsaress carried it into exile with her into Denmark, I think, because she was from Denmark. In any event, like the image is carried around, and I think now they found it in Montenegro in a museum, right? But this is interesting. In 1987, the Holy See decreed September 8th as the feast of Our Lady of Palermo. In 1988, The Order of Malta was entrusted to the Virgin Mary during a Eucharistic celebration in the Lourdes Grotto, right? This consecration is solemnly renewed each year. There's a copy of the image of Our Lady of Palermo, which was done in Russia at the beginning of the 19th century, which is kept in the Basilica of Santa Maria de los Angeles, Our Lady of the Angels, in Assisi, Italy, where every 8th of September, the Knights of Malta make a very devout pilgrimage. Interesting. Continuing, we also celebrate Our Lady of Good Health in Valancani in Italy. For the at the beginning of the month, we already explained a little bit of the different apparitions. Obviously, this is the Basilica in India. It's a huge feast day for them. It's also known as the Lourdes of the East, right? It's interesting. Pope John Paul II said that Valancani attracts not only Christian pilgrims, but also many followers of other religion, especially Hindus, who see in Our Lady of Good Health the caring and compassionate mother of suffering humanity. In a land of such ancient and deep religiosity like India, this shrine dedicated to the Mother of God is truly a meeting point for members of different religions and an outstanding example of interreligious harmony and exchange. Okay, beautiful words from the Pope. Likewise, they also celebrate La Virgen de los Remedios, Our Lady of Remedies, in Pampanga in the Philippines. Our Lady of Remedies is also known as Induning Kapaladanan and Tulading Kampamangang. At the Shrine of Our Lady of Nazaré in Portugal, they celebrate Our Lady of Nazaré. In Mexico, throughout Mexico, they celebrate La Divina Infantita, the Divine Infant, Our Lady. In Zacatecas, they celebrate Our Lady of the Zacatecas. And then they also celebrate in Cuba Our Lady of Charity, right? Nuestra Señora de la Caridad del Cobre, right? Of copper. But that's the name of the town. So the story is like this. Around 1612, two native brothers, Juan and Rodrigo de Hoyos, and a 10-year-old slave, Juan Moreno, were canoeing to a salt harvesting area to get salt for the cattle belonging to a nearby copper mining operation in northeast Cuba. But they hadn't gone far from their camp when they saw a small statue that floated towards them on the Bay of Nipe. The Virgin and Child, mysteriously clothed in perfectly dry vestments, on a board inscribed, "I am the Virgin of Charity," right? So they took her aboard, gathered a little bit of salt, and then brought her to their ranch in Barajuaga. The head of the mining operation had a little chapel built to house the statue and made Rodrigo the caretaker. However, he repeatedly discovered the statue disappearing from the locked chapel and just mysteriously returning. It was moved to El Cobre, copper, about 10 miles south, but it continued to come and go from the church there, right? Then a girl named Apollonia saw the Virgin of Charity in the Sierra Maestra foothills near the copper mine where her mother worked. So the statue was moved to the hills where it has remained since, right? A miracle-working focus of devotion for Catholic Cubans everywhere. The image itself is about 16 inches tall. It's a terracotta image, which holds the child in her left hand and a jeweled cross in her right. She stands on an inverted silver crescent atop a silver orb dedicated with angel heads. In 1916, Pope Benedict XV proclaimed the Virgin of Charity the patroness of Cuba. On December 20th, 1936, the Archbishop of Santiago de Cuba solemnly crowned the statue during the National Eucharistic Congress there at the request of Pope Pius XI. After the 1959 revolution, the shrine continued to exist, and Pope Paul VI made it a minor basilica in 1977, but without all the public expressions of the faith in the old days. On January 24th, 1998, the statue returned to the city of Santiago de Cuba, where Pope St. John Paul II recrowned it during his historic visit. Right. Since then, the shrine has held processions on the feast of September 8th and other holy days. Right. Likewise, we said they celebrate in Spain Nuestra Señora de Regla in Spain. That's we already mentioned that in an earlier day. They also celebrate, this is a very important one, Our Lady of Shilwa, Our Lady of the Pine Woods. This is in Lithuania, right? Pope Pius VI granted a canonical coronation to the image on September 8th, 1786, and Pope John Paul II raised the shrine of Our Lady of Shilwa to a minor basilica on May 6th, 1988. So the Catholic devotion at this site goes back almost to the beginning of Christianity in Lithuania. The Grand Duke Jogaila was baptized Catholic in 1387 when he married Jadwiga, the queen of neighboring Poland. I think Jadwiga is a saint. He and his successors worked to spread the faith until in their territory, which had been pagan. They established church hierarchy, built churches, and even personally taught catechism. According to legend, this miraculous image of Our Lady of Clairvaux was brought to Clairvaux from Rome in 1457 as a gift to a Lithuanian nobleman, a Petras Gedgaudas. The church became popular. However, only a short while later, in 1532, the population in Clairvaux became predominantly Calvinist, right? During this time, many of the Catholic Church were confiscated and closed. However, as long as the church was open, people continued to attend the annual feast. Finally, the church was closed and eventually burned to the ground, right? So around 1596, the only remaining parish priest, Father John Holubka, hid all the remaining church valuables and documents in an iron box, which he buried on the grounds of the devastated church. So later, the Catholics they started legal proceedings against the Calvinists because they wanted to get back their church property, which had been confiscated. The problem was nobody had the documents that said that the Catholic Church was actually Catholic. So it was in the summer of 1608 when a few children who were tending their sheep in a field that was some distance away from Clairvaux reported they saw a beautiful woman holding a baby, and that appeared exactly on the spot where the church had stood. The woman was weeping bitterly. So what they did then is they returned, accompanied the next day by the whole village and the Calvinist minister, and they all saw her as well. When word spread, an old blind man who had helped the priest in burying the treasures of the original church recalled the location, right? After the apparition, those documents which proved the ownership of the church were found, and in 1622, the case concerning the restitution of Catholic ownership was won. So they built a small wooden church, the Church of the Nativity of the Blessed Virgin Mary, but it was proved too small, and so they finally built a much larger church only 20 years later in 1641. Pope Pius VI confirmed the authenticity of the apparition of Our Lady of Clairvaux by a papal decree promulgated August 17th, 1775, right? The image of Our Lady of Mount Carmel in Cuyo, Mendoza, Argentina was crowned solemnly on this day in 1911. And last but not least, we also recall the apparition of Our Lady in Alexandria, Egypt, which took place between the night of September 7th and 8th. And this took place in 1858 to Saint Mary of Jesus Crucified, right, of the Discalced Carmelites. She's also known as the Little Arab, right? She was beatified by Pope John Paul II in 1983, and she was recently canonized by Pope Francis on May 17th, 2015 as a Carmelite, right? So the story it starts off kind of tragic. When the Little Arab, her lay name is Miriam Bawardi, when she was 12, her uncle engaged her to be married to the brother of his wife, right? Who was a young guy from Cairo, Egypt. When Marian found out, she said that she did not want to get married. She wanted to be married to Jesus. On the eve of her marriage, she heard the voice of Jesus whisper, "Everything will pass. If you will give me your heart, I will always be with you." And so Mariam refused the marriage, right? She just said, forget it. And then her uncles really made her suffer. I think she was an orphan, right? And so she was... she wanted to go to, she went with a former employee of her uncle who was going to Nazareth, right? So she wanted to go to Nazareth. And so he, sorry, I'm getting confused here. So he was Muslim, and he invited her to become a Muslim. And she said, she said rather firmly, "I'm a daughter of the Catholic Apostolic Roman Church. With the grace of God, I hope to persevere in this until death in my religion, the only true religion." So this former employee was not happy. He took out his scimitar and actually struck her throat, thinking like he wrapped her up in a sheet and left her on some random dark street. When she recovered, when she woke up, right, she was not dead. she found herself in a grotto being assisted by a religious dressed in blue, right? Who in a few words told her of her future, right? She said, "Be happy if you must still suffer for God. He will only send you what is necessary and always accept it for the best," right? And so Marian was later convinced that this must have been the Blessed Virgin Mary. And for that reason, she always celebrated with great solemnity the feast of the Nativity of the Blessed Virgin Mary, to recall that September 8th, when Our Lady appeared to her and helped her. So that, in the Marian world, is what we are celebrating today, September 8th, the birthday of our Blessed Mother. For today's reading from True Devotion to Mary by Saint Louis de Montfort, we continue with his introductory points. Again, these are little like aphorisms, just kind of keep in mind, right? 6. I say with the saints, the Divine Mary is the terrestrial paradise of the new Adam, where he is incarnate by the operation of the Holy Ghost in order to work their incomprehensible marvels. She is the grand and divine world of God, where there are beauties and treasures unspeakable. She is the magnificence of the Most High, where he has hidden, as in her bosom, his only Son, and in him all that is most excellent and most precious. Oh, what grand and hidden things that mighty God has wrought in this admirable creature! How has she herself been compelled to say it, in spite of her profound humility? Ficit mihi magna qui potens est. Right? He has done great things in me. He who is powerful. The world knows them not, because it is at once incapable and unworthy of such knowledge. 7. The saints have said admirable things of this holy city of God, and as they themselves avow, they have never been more eloquent and more content than they have when they have spoken of her. Yet, after all they have said, they cry out that the height of her merits, which she has raised up to the throne of the divinity, cannot be fully seen. That the breadth of her charity, which is broader than the earth, is in truth immeasurable. That the grandeur of her power, which she exercises even over God himself, incomprehensible. And finally, that the depth of her humility, and of all her virtues and graces, is an abyss which can never be sounded. O height incomprehensible, O breadth unspeakable, O grandeur immeasurable, O abyss impenetrable. 8. Every day, from one end of the earth to the other, in the highest heights of the heavens and the profoundest depths of the abysses, everything preaches, everything publishes the admirable Mary. The 9 choirs of angels, men of all ages, sexes, conditions, and religions, good or bad, nay, even the devils themselves, willingly or unwillingly, are compelled by the force of truth to call her blessed. Saint Bonaventure tells us that all the angels in heaven cry out incessantly to her, Sancta, Sancta, Sancta Maria, Dei Genitrix et Virgo, like Holy, Holy, Holy Mary, Mother of God and Virgin. And they offer to her millions and millions of times a day the angelical salutation, Ave Maria, prostrating themselves before her and begging of her in her graciousness to honor them with some of her commands. St. Michael, as St. Augustine says, although he is the prince of all the heavenly court, is the most zealous in honoring her and causing her to be honored, while he waits always in expectation that he may have the honor to go at her bidding to render service to some one of her servants.
Hello, and we hope that you enjoyed listening to our Marian podcast. In the spirit of Saint Bernard of Clairvaux, we say to you that there is no greater delight than to spread the devotion of Our Lady. We hope you share these sentiments and encourage you greatly to share with a loved one. Know that you are always in our prayers, and we ask that you keep us in yours. God bless.